When Rosie's grandfather's multi-million-dollar estate was divided, her wealthy family walked away with deeds, vintage sports cars, and stock portfolios. To Rosie, the granddaughter who had spent 4 years caring for him, he left a single yellow envelope containing a past-due storage bill for $1,420. But her grandfather knew exactly what he was doing. The air inside the mahogany-paneled conference room of Zimmerman and Caldwell attorneys at law on North Duke Street in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, smelled of old parchment, expensive leather, and unvarnished greed. It was a damp Tuesday morning in late October. Rosie's grandfather, Augustus Artie Evans, had been laid to rest 4 days earlier at the age of 86. For nearly 5 decades, Augustus had been an enigma in Lancaster County, a retired master machinist, former industrial surveyor for Bethlehem Steel, and a man rumored to have made sharp, secretive investments during the post-war industrial boom. Her uncle Richard sat directly across the polished walnut table, wearing a tailored charcoal suit that cost more than her monthly rent. Beside him sat her aunt, Beatrice, dabbing dry eyes with an embroidered silk handkerchief, while her son, Tyler, tapped his platinum watch impatiently. Then there was Rosie. She sat at the far end of the table in a navy skirt suit she had bought second-hand for job interviews. While Richard and Beatrice had visited Augustus only during holidays to ask for bridge loans or subtle handouts, Rosie had spent the last 4 years driving to his drafty brick bungalow every Tuesday and Saturday. She had prepared his low-sodium meals, organized his blood pressure medications, listened to his long, winding stories about industrial Pennsylvania, and held his calloused hand in the hospice wing at Lancaster General Hospital when his breathing finally grew still. Harold Zimmerman, an attorney whose family had managed Augustus's legal affairs since 1974, cleared his throat, adjusted his rimless glasses, and rested his hands on a thick manila dossier. "We are gathered to execute the final wishes of Augustus Joseph Evans," Mr. Zimmerman began in a dry, measured baritone. "The estate is solvent, and all primary debts, estate taxes, and final expenses have been settled out of the principal liquid accounts." Uncle Richard leaned forward, his eyes narrowing with anticipation. "To my son, Richard Evans," Mr. Zimmerman read from the document, "I bequeath the residential property located at 412 Marietta Avenue, Lancaster, clear of any liens, along with the sum of $385,000 held in the municipal bond trust." Richard let out a slow, satisfied exhale, leaning back into his leather armchair with a faint, condescending smirk. "To my daughter, Beatrice Evans Cole," the lawyer continued, "I bequeath the contents of Safety Deposit Box 409 at Fulton Bank, comprising the historical family jewelry and the secondary investment portfolio valued at $290,000. Beatrice pressed her handkerchief to her face, murmuring, "Dear father, he always knew how much that meant to the family." Rosie's heart hammered against her ribs. It wasn't about the money. She had never expected Augustus to make her rich, but she had hoped for a token of recognition, a personal keepsake, or perhaps his collection of hand-drafted engineering sketchbooks that they used to pore over together on Sunday afternoons. Mr. Zimmerman paused, took off his glasses, and looked directly down the length of the table at her. His expression was completely unreadable. "And finally, to my granddaughter, Rosie Evans," Tyler chuckled under his breath, whispering something to Beatrice. Richard folded his arms, waiting. Alongside all responsibilities rights, and titles attached to the document contained therein. Mr. Zimmerman slid a worn, standard manila business envelope across the expansive table. It came to a stop directly in front of Rosie's hands. The room fell dead silent. "Is that it?" Tyler asked, a smirk breaking across his face. "A letter?" Rosie's hands trembled slightly as she picked up the envelope. It was surprisingly thick, but it didn't contain a check or a deed. She slid her finger under the flap and pulled out the contents. On top was an official notice printed on glaring neon pink paper from Keystone Ridge Self-Storage, located off Route 23 near the industrial outskirts of New Holland. It was not an inheritance. It was a final notice of default and immediate auction. Account holder, Augustus J. Evans. Unit, number 308, climate-controlled annex. Past. Due balance, 1,420 euros. Status, auction scheduled within 48 hours upon non-payment. Contents forfeit. Beneath the invoice was a single handwritten note on Augustus's personal legal pad, written in his familiar, sharp drafting script. "Rosie, pay the man at the counter. Do not let Richard touch the lock. What is inside belongs to someone who understands the weight of what we build." Uncle Richard stood up, craning his neck to look at the pink paper in her hands. When he realized what it was, he burst into a harsh, mocking laugh that echoed off the high walls of the conference room. "A delinquent storage locker," Richard scoffed, shaking his head with performative pity. "The old man left you an unpaid bill for a unit full of junk. You spent 4 years wiping his counters and driving him to the clinic, Rosie. And he left you $1,500 in debt." "Richard, please," Beatrice said with false sympathy, though her lips curled with unmistakable satisfaction. Rosie did what she thought was right. It's not her fault father became eccentric in his final years. "Rosie, dear, if you don't have the cash to pay the balance, Tyler can give you $50 for the scrap metal before they auction it off." "I don't need your money, Tyler," Rosie said quietly, standing up from the chair. Her voice shook with a mixture of grief, embarrassment, and raw anger, but she refused to let them see her cry. "Suit yourself, kid," Richard said, gathering his coat. "Let the facility auction it. It's probably 40 years of rusty drill bits and moldy newspapers from the foundry. Don't waste your rent money on an old man's forgotten junk." Rosie didn't answer. She carefully folded the pink eviction notice, placed Augustus's handwritten note back into her coat pocket, and walked out of the law office into the chilling Pennsylvania drizzle. By Wednesday afternoon, the rain had turned into a steady, freezing downpour that battered the windshield of Rosie's 10-year-old sedan. Paying that bill had nearly emptied her checking account. She had handed over 14 crisp $100 bills and a 20 to the skeptical teller at her credit union, money that was supposed to cover her upcoming semester of graduate school tuition and car insurance. Her bank balance sat at exactly $43. If Richard had been right, if Unit 308 was nothing more than water-damaged clutter and hoarded machine scrap, she had just made the most financially disastrous decision of her life. She pulled off Route 23 onto the cracked asphalt of Keystone Ridge Self-Storage. The facility looked like a relic of the late 1980s. Rows of low-slung, corrugated steel buildings, painted faded industrial beige, surrounded by an 8-foot chain-link fence topped with barbed wire. Inside the cinder-block front office, the air smelled of stale coffee and damp cardboard. Behind the laminate counter sat Dale Kowalski, a stocky man in his late 50s, wearing a faded, grease-stained cap, flipping through an inventory log. "Help you?" Dale asked without looking up. "I'm Rosie Evans. I'm here to settle the past due balance on Unit 308, Augustus Evans' unit." Dale stopped mid-page. He looked up, his eyes narrowing slightly as he took her in. "Augustus's granddaughter?" "Yes." He leaned back in his squeaky swivel chair and let out a low whistle. "Artie was a character. Kept that unit for 26 years without missing a single payment until 6 months ago when he got sick. Corporate was ready to cut the lock tomorrow at 8 in the morning and sell the lot to an estate liquidator from Reading." Rosie placed the certified bank cashier's check on the counter alongside Augustus's death certificate and the estate authorization letter Mr. Zimmerman had signed. Dale checked the paperwork thoroughly, stamped the ledger with a red "paid in full" seal, and pulled a heavy brass master key from a rack behind him. "Unit 308 is in the rear annex," Dale said, stepping out from behind the counter and grabbing an oversized yellow slicker. Most of these units are drive-ups, but the annex was built into the old limestone foundation of the machine shop that stood here in the 50s. Climate-controlled, thick concrete walls, heavy fire doors. "Follow me." They drove their cars to the back perimeter of the compound, where a squat concrete building was nestled against a rocky embankment. Dale unlocked the exterior steel door, and they stepped into a long, dimly lit corridor. The fluorescent tubes overhead hummed softly, casting a stark white glow over the row of numbered, heavy industrial doors. They stopped in front of Unit 308. Unlike the standard roll-up garage doors of the other units, 308 was fitted with a reinforced, solid steel swing door, secured by a massive weathered American Lock Master Series padlock. "Your grandfather brought his own lock back in '98, Dale said, pointing to the keyway. "Told me nobody touches this door unless they have his personal key and a paid receipt." Rosie reached into her bag and pulled out the small brass key Augustus had kept on his everyday key ring, the one he always carried in his watch pocket. Her hands shook as she inserted it into the cylinder. With a heavy metallic clack, the internal tumblers shifted, and the lock popped open. Dale stepped back, crossing his arms. "I'll give you some privacy. Call out if you need a hand with heavy lifting." "Thank you, Dale. If..." Rosie pulled the heavy steel handle. The door groaned on its heavy-duty hinges, opening inward to reveal a 15 by 20-foot space. A wave of air hit her, surprisingly dry, cool, and smelling intensely of cedar shavings, gun oil, industrial solvent, and ozone. She reached inside the frame and flicked the wall switch. 4 dual-tube industrial shop lights flickered to life, buzzing loudly before flooding the unit with brilliant white light. For a moment, her heart sank. At first glance, it appeared as though her uncle's cynical prediction had come true. Lining the left wall were towering industrial steel shelving units, packed with cardboard boxes labeled with faded grease pencil. Lathe tooling 1968. Bethlehem Plant 2 schematics. Hydraulic seals obsolete. In the center of them sat a massive cast-iron drill press, its unpainted metal coated in thick, amber-colored Cosmoline preservative. Stacks of yellowed engineering trade journals from the 1970s and 80s leaned precariously in the corner, beside old wooden crates marked with stencil ink. "Is this it, Grandpa?" Rosie whispered aloud, the sound of her voice swallowed by the concrete walls. "Did you really bring me all the way out here for scrap iron?" She stepped further into the room, her boots echoing against the sealed concrete floor. She walked toward the back of the space, where a heavy, olive-drab steel military footlocker rested atop 2 wooden blocks. Stenciled in faded white paint across the lid was capped A.J. Evans, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Sitting on top of the footlocker was a pristine, dust-free, leather-bound notebook with an envelope taped to the front, bearing her name in Augustus's sharp handwriting. Rosie peeled the envelope off the leather cover and tore it open. "My dear Rosie, if you are reading this, it means you paid the fee, stood your ground, and didn't sell this room to Richard or Beatrice for pennies. Your uncle sees value only in what can be deposited in an account by Friday afternoon. He never understood that the real treasures of this world are the things people forgot how to look for." In 1971, when the old Lancaster Locomotive Foundry and the Eastern Tooling Works shuttered their experimental design divisions, they threw 50 years of American innovation into the dumpster to clear floor space for imported stamped sheet metal. I didn't let them destroy it. Open the footlocker. Take the brass key inside the front compartment. Look underneath the false table base of the 1952 Cincinnati Hydrotel milling head in the far corner. What you will find is not scrap. Be careful who you show it to. Call Thomas Prescott at the Philadelphia Historical Archive. Tell him Artie Evans finally decided to open the vault. I love you, kiddo. Grandpa Augustus. Rosie set the letter down, her heart pounding violently against her ribs. She approached the footlocker, unbuckled the rusted canvas straps, and flipped the heavy latches. Inside, packed neatly in foam and heavy oilcloth, was an array of vintage surveying instruments, brass-encased marine chronometers, and a velvet-lined case containing a heavy 6-inch iron key with intricate custom-milled barrel teeth. She turned around and looked back at the corner of the room, where the massive cast-iron industrial milling apparatus sat under an oil-stained canvas tarp. Rosie pulled the tarp away. The machine looked like an ordinary, discarded piece of heavy mid-century manufacturing equipment. But as she knelt down near the concrete floor and examined the heavy iron baseplate, she noticed something strange. The casting wasn't bolted to the floor. It was bolted to a custom steel plate that sat over a sunken floor vault embedded directly into the facility's limestone bedrock foundation. On the front plate of the iron base, hidden behind a swing-away steel nameplate that read, "Property of Bethlehem, Steel Corp., 1958, was a recessed keyhole. She took the 6-inch iron key from the velvet case, inserted it into the hidden keyhole, and turned it with all her strength. A deep, mechanical clunk reverberated through the concrete floor. The entire heavy baseplate shifted forward on hidden roller bearings, unlocking a deep steel hatch beneath the machine. Inside the limestone-lined floor vault sat 3 fireproof, airtight Pelican security cases, sealed with tamper-evident heavy wax seals, alongside rows of bound, leather-wrapped ledgers stamped with gold foil seals from the United States Patent and Trademark Office, dating between 1954 and 1982. Rosie reached out and unlatched the first Pelican case. When the lid swung open, she gasped, clapping both hands over her mouth. It wasn't scrap iron. It wasn't old machine parts. Resting inside the custom-cut velvet foam were rows of solid, serialized industrial platinum and palladium ingots used as catalytic refining standards by heavy industry in the 1960s, before being privately bought and stored, alongside original, uncirculated design patent certificates and uncut sheets of early American corporate bearer bonds that had never been registered to modern digital ledgers. Beside the metals was a thick blue folder bearing the embossed seal of the United States Department of the Interior. Her grandfather hadn't left her an unpaid bill. He had handed her the forgotten keys to an industrial fortune that her family had spent 30 years assuming was nothing more than the daydreams of an old mechanic. And as her phone suddenly began to buzz in her pocket with an incoming call from Uncle Richard, Rosie realized that the battle for Unit 308 was only just beginning. Rosie's phone buzzed relentlessly against the concrete floor. The display lit up with Uncle Richard. She let it ring out into the stillness of the subterranean vault. Her fingertips traced the cold satin surface of the ingots. Each rectangular bar of industrial-grade platinum bore the unmistakable hallmark of the Engelhard Corporation, dated 1967, alongside certified purity marks of .99995. There were 24 bars in the first case alone, each stamped at 50 troy ounces. In the second Pelican case lay 32 original patent deed assignments, preserved in acid-free archival sleeves with modern royalty audit summaries from an intellectual property firm in Philadelphia. Rosie sat back on her heels as Augustus's stories snapped into focus. In the late 1960s, he had co-engineered high-pressure hydraulic valve assemblies and rotary fluid stabilizers for heavy industry. When the manufacturing consortium fractured during corporate buyouts in the 1980s, Augustus quietly bought out the intellectual property and physical metallurgy reserves with his severance package. For decades, the licensing revenue had flowed into a private entity called Vulcan Heritage Trust. Free distribution was reinvested into physical refining metals and untouched municipal bearer instruments, completely separate from his domestic bank accounts. Augustus knew that if Richard or Beatrice ever discovered the magnitude of his holdings, they would spend years litigating him into an early grave to strip the assets. Rosie pulled out her phone and dialed the number from Augustus's notebook. Prescott Historical and Asset Archival, Thomas Prescott speaking. Mr. Prescott, my name is Rosie Evans, Augustus Evans' granddaughter. A sharp intake of breath came over the line. Rosie, your grandfather spoke to me about you right before he went into palliative care. He told me that if you called, you held the key to the Cincinnati Hydrotel vault. I'm in Unit 308 right now, she said steadily. The vault is open. The cases are intact. I need professional legal and security guidance immediately. Listen closely, Prescott said with urgent precision. Do not move those cases in your car. Keystone Ridge is secure, but that floor vault is the safest place in Lancaster County until armored transport arrives. I'm contacting our security partners, Iron Mountain Armored Services, and our senior trust attorney, Walter Harris. We'll be in New Holland within 90 minutes. Lock the unit, wait in the front office, and tell no one. Understood. Rosie latched the Pelican cases, slid the heavy milling base back into place over the hidden floor hatch, and locked the steel door with Augustus's heavy Master Series padlock. Back in the cinderblock office, Dale Kowalski was sipping black coffee. Everything all right back there, kid? Dale asked. You look like you've seen a ghost. Just processing everything, Dale, Rosie said, sitting on the vinyl bench. Some associates from an estate archival firm in Philadelphia are coming down to inventory technical records. They'll be here shortly. Dale chuckled dryly. Artie paid the rent on that room 25 years in advance, back in '98. When corporate claimed it was delinquent, it was just a software glitch last month. Artie told me before the hospital, Dale, let the pink default notice go through to the estate lawyer. Let's see who shows up to claim the scrap. Rosie stared at him, stunned. He planned the default notice? Every detail. Artie never left a bolt unthreaded. Tires crunched over gravel outside. A sleek black BMW 7 Series pulled aggressively into the lot, splashing dirty water across her sedan. Uncle Richard stepped out, followed by Aunt Beatrice and a sharp-featured man in a pinstriped suit holding a briefcase. Richard pushed through the front door, the brass bell clattering loudly. "Rosie," Richard said with a patronizing smirk. "What a coincidence. We came to save you the trouble of clearing out the old man's junk." "What are you doing here, Richard?" she asked, standing up. "After the reading, we consulted with Family Estate Counsel, Mr. Gregory Vance," Beatrice chimed in, smoothing her coat. The lawyer stepped forward. "Miss Evans, under Augustus Evans. Primary testamentary trust, industrial equipment, and unlisted business property outside residential premises fall under the residuary estate clause, which belongs exclusively to Richard. Grandpa bequeathed the envelope and all attached rights to me," Rosie countered firmly. "I paid the lien. The unit lease, contents, and access rights are registered in my name. A technicality over a past-due storage slip," Richard scoffed, stepping closer. "You're a 24-year-old lab assistant, Rosie. You don't know what you're doing. We know Augustus kept company blueprints from the Bethlehem buyout. Hand over the key, and I'll write you a check right now for $10,000. Clean break." "If it's just scrap iron, Uncle Richard, why did you race down Route 23 with your lawyer 40 minutes after the will was read?" Richard's face flushed crimson. He slammed his hand onto the counter. "Dale, cut the lock on Unit 308. We are the primary executors." Dale didn't flinch. He set down his mug. "Mr. Evans, the lady holds the verified title, the paid receipt, the authorization, and the key. Take one step past that gate without a court order, and I'll have the state police here in 4 minutes for criminal trespass." "I'll have this place shuttered by Friday," Richard roared. "You're welcome to try, Mr. Evans." A calm, authoritative voice echoed from the doorway. They all turned toward the entrance. 2 men in tailored dark overcoats stepped into the office. The older man, with silver hair and an aura of quiet authority, was Thomas Prescott. Beside him stood Walter Harris, one of the most prominent industrial trust attorneys in Pennsylvania, flanked by 2 uniformed security officers from Iron Mountain Armored Logistics. "Mr. Vance," Walter Harris said, addressing Richard's lawyer directly, "I suggest you advise your clients to step away from Miss Evans immediately before you commit a profound professional ethics violation." Gregory Vance's face drained of color the moment he recognized Harris. "Walter, what is your firm's involvement in a minor estate dispute?" "There is no dispute," Harris replied smoothly, opening a thick leather portfolio. "I am the appointed trustee of the Vulcan Heritage Trust, established by Augustus J. Evans in 1984. Under the strict terms of the irrevocable Inter Vivos Trust Agreement, all physical, intellectual, and financial holdings stored within Keystone Ridge Unit 308 were transferred outside the probate estate more than 3 decades ago." Harris pulled out a series of notarized documents bearing the official seal of the Pennsylvania Department of State. The late Augustus Evans designated Rosie Evans as the sole, unalterable beneficiary of the trust upon the demonstration of 2 specific conditions. First, that she personally satisfy the estate continuity test by honoring the storage covenant. And second, that she open the facility in person using his personal key. Beatrice let out a sharp, panicked gasp. "What trust? What are you talking about? Father didn't have a trust. He was a retired plant supervisor. Your father was the sole holder of 17 foundational metallurgy and precision milling patents that currently license technology to aerospace, defense, and deep-sea industrial manufacturers across North America, Thomas Prescott said, stepping forward. He also accumulated over 1,200 troy ounces of high-purity industrial platinum and rare earth refining elements during the 1970s commodity transitions. Prescott turned to Rosie, a warm, respectful smile touching his lips. Rosie, the current market valuation of the physical precious metals, accrued trust dividends, and active licensing royalties held within Unit 308 stands at approximately $22,400,000. The office went so quiet that the only sound was the steady hum of the fluorescent lights. Richard staggered back against the wall as if he had been struck across the face. 22 million? That is impossible! Beatrice shrieked, her voice cracking with hysteria. He lived like a pauper. He gave us $300,000 and an old house. We are his children. We are his blood. Augustus knew exactly what you were, Beatrice, Harris said coldly. He knew that if he left you substantial wealth, you would squander it on vanity within 5 years. And he knew Richard would leverage it on speculative developments that collapse. He left this trust to the only person in this family who valued him for who he was, rather than what he could provide. Harris turned to Vance, who was already packing his leather briefcase in silent mortification. Mr. Vance, if your clients attempt to file a single frivolous injunction or contest the validity of this transfer, the trust will immediately invoke the reciprocal non-contest clause in Augustus's primary will. That means Richard and Beatrice will forfeit their residential deeds, their cash bequests, and their bond distributions back to the primary charitable trust. Vance grabbed Richard's arm, his voice hushed and urgent. Richard, stop talking. We're leaving. Right now. If you contest this, you lose everything. Richard stared at Rosie, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock, hatred, and absolute defeat. For the first time in his life, her arrogant, dismissive uncle had nothing left to say. Without another word, he turned, shoved his way out the door, and got back into his car, with Beatrice weeping hysterically in the passenger seat. As their car sped out of the rain-slicked parking lot, the tension in the room vanished. Dale let out a low whistle and chuckled. Well, Artie, you sure knew how to build a machine. Under the watchful supervision of the Iron Mountain security team, the 3 Pelican cases and the historical patent ledgers were carefully transferred into the climate-controlled security vehicle to be transported directly to the private vault at BNY Mellon in Philadelphia. Before they closed the heavy steel door of Unit 308 for the last time, Rosie stepped back inside. She walked over to the old cast-iron Cincinnati Hydro Tel milling head and rested her hand on the cold iron. Augustus hadn't left her a burden. He hadn't left her an insult. He had given her the greatest test of character she would ever face, and in doing so, he had completely rewritten her future. She looked up at the ceiling, feeling the familiar warmth of his memory settle into her heart. Thank you, Grandpa, she whispered. I'll make sure it builds something that lasts. Rosie turned her grandfather's industrial legacy into the Augustus Evans Foundation, funding technical education and engineering scholarships for underprivileged students across Pennsylvania. True wealth isn't just about what sits in a bank account. It's about character, loyalty, and honoring the people who truly love us. If you loved this story and believe that genuine integrity always wins in the end, Please smash the like button, share this video with your family and friends, and subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories every week.